Mr. President, we are now more than 6 months, halfway through the 2026 fiscal year. And somehow, thanks to my Democrat colleagues, there are still parts of the federal government that aren't funded for 2026.
Yes.
43 days. 43 days Democrats shut down the government last fall.
You know, the safety of our nation is being sold out by politicians who cares more about optics than protecting American families. And they are Democrats. Let's listen to this. It's crazy.
The longest government shutdown ever. All because they couldn't bring themselves to accept a clean, nonpartisan funding bill. Now they've refused to fully fund the Department of Homeland Security for well over 50 days.
Ooh.
All because they couldn't take yes for an answer. Republicans and Democrats had reached an agreement in January to fund the Department of Homeland Security for the remainder of the fiscal year. But Democrats reneged on that agreement, demanding reforms to immigration and customs enforcement over and above the reforms, I might add, that had already been agreed to in the funding bill. And Republicans, Mr. President, Republicans offered to give them additional reforms.
Right.
In addition to implementing reforms on its own, the White House repeatedly offered Democrats a robust package of additional reforms. But nothing was ever enough for the Democrats. They just kept moving the goalposts, and eventually they just walked away. Turns out their objective wasn't actually reform, it was a political issue.
It's more political, you know.
They didn't want a solution, they wanted a talking point. Although I think they've overestimated how well defund law enforcement is going to play in November. Because let's be very clear, Mr. President, that's what this is. If this were about making reforms to some of the ways law enforcement does business, then Democrats would have accepted reforms. But they didn't. Instead, shortly before Easter, Democrats voted to defund law enforcement at the Department of Homeland Security. They voted to defund deportation of criminal illegal aliens, individuals guilty of things like murder, assault, and sexual crimes against minors. They voted to defund drug interdiction.
Yeah, that's crazy.
They voted to defund the DHS arm that investigates transnational criminal organizations, narcotic smuggling, and human traffickers.
Yeah, that's a shame.
They voted to defund border security.
Shame.
That's right, Mr. President. Democrats voted to defund U.S. Border Patrol. Apparently, the Biden administration, with its 4 years of record-breaking illegal immigration, was not an anomaly. Democrats
4 years.
really don't believe in defending our borders. I have to say, Mr. President, it's mind-boggling. Leaving aside the national security implications of Democrats' position, Democrats do realize that it was partly the Biden border crisis that helped sink their party in the last election, don't they? I would think so. Do they really think that defunding border enforcement is going to give them a victory in November? Mr. President, since Democrats have chosen to abdicate their responsibility to fund key parts of the Department of Homeland Security, Republicans are stepping in. Thanks to our foresight in the working families tax cuts, immigration enforcement and border security are funded through the end of this fiscal year.
Republicans, save us.
But it is clear we can't rely on Democrats to fund law enforcement when it comes time to pass fiscal year 2027 funding in September. And so Republicans are going to take up a reconciliation bill to fund border security and immigration enforcement for the next 3 years. Senator Graham and the Senate Budget Committee are already working on a budget resolution to set up consideration of this bill. And I want to see the Senate take up this resolution and the subsequent bill, the reconciliation bill to follow, without delay. We need to keep this process tight and focused so that we can get this done. Otherwise, we're going to end up in the unacceptable situation where parts of the Department of Homeland Security are going unfunded, not just now, but for the long term. I know that Republicans in both houses of Congress are in complete agreement on the need to ensure that law enforcement is fully funded. And I'm more than confident that if we work together, we can have legislation to the President in the near future.
Yes, do it, please.
And as for my Democrat colleagues,
shame.
Well, I guess we'll see how well open borders and defunding law enforcement play for them in November.
It's absolutely sickening to watch what is happening to our country right now. We are more than halfway through the fiscal year. Yet the Democrats are still playing political games with our national security. They have spent over 50 days, refusing to fund the Department of Homeland Security, all because they want to move to goalposts on immigration enforcement. It's shameful they actually voted to defund the very people who protects us from criminal illegal aliens, drug smugglers, and human traffickers. They are choosing to abdicate their most basic responsibility to the American people just to keep a political talking point alive. You know, they are destroying the foundation of our safety, and frankly, they should be embarrassed. Our borders and our law enforcement are not pawns for your next election cycle. It's time to stop the games and start putting this country first. You know, but these Democrats, they wanted so bad to push this immigration because they know they can only win if the Democrats, if these illegal aliens, if they import thousands, millions of illegal aliens, especially from Somalia, here in US, to vote for them. That's their only way. So what are your thoughts about this issue? I want to know your thoughts. Comment down below and we'll discuss that. Don't forget to like and subscribe this video. I'm out. Peace.